I was sitting in my favorite chair, wrapped in my blanket, completely lost in the world of my TV show. Every laugh, every tear, every twist, it felt like my escape. Then he walked in, stormed up to the TV, and slammed the remote down. "Enough of this trash," he shouted. I froze. My heart sank. What I didn't know was that this one act would change everything I thought I knew about him, and about myself. I was curled up on my old, worn-out armchair, the kind that had molded perfectly to my shape over the years. The blanket was pulled up around my shoulders, the soft hum of the heater in the corner filling the quiet room, and the TV flickered with the familiar opening sequence of my favorite show. I had been waiting all week for this moment, a small slice of escape where I could let the world fade away and immerse myself in a story that made me laugh, made me gasp, and sometimes even made me tear up. The episode had just started, the characters' voices filling the room with that comforting rhythm that had become almost like a lullaby. I leaned back, closed my eyes for a second, and let myself drift with the narrative, completely absorbed. Then the front door opened with a sharp click, the kind of sound that makes you tense without even realizing it, and in walked my son-in-law. His face was unusually tight, his jaw set, and his eyes immediately locked onto the TV with a kind of intensity that made me uneasy. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask how my day was. He just walked straight toward the television, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, and before I could even speak, his hand shot out and pressed the power button. The screen went black. "Enough of this trash," he barked, his voice sharp and unyielding, filling the room like a sudden storm. The remote clattered to the coffee table as he turned toward me, and for a moment, I just stared at him, frozen. My heart skipped a beat, a strange mix of shock, hurt, and disbelief crashing through me. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in my throat. The silence stretched, tense and suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the heater. I slowly got up from my chair, gripping the edge for balance, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. What do you mean, trash?" I finally managed, my voice trembling slightly, more from shock than anger. He didn't step back or soften. Instead, he crossed his arms, his eyes piercing into mine as if trying to drill some sense into me that I didn't understand. "This show, these hours you waste staring at that screen, it's ridiculous. Don't you see how meaningless it is?" I blinked, completely disoriented. I had never heard him talk to me like this, not even in the smallest disagreement. His words didn't just feel harsh. They felt like a judgment, a condemnation aimed at something I cherished, something that gave me comfort. My first instinct was to argue, to defend the little ritual that brought me peace at the end of long days. But the way he stood there, rigid and serious, froze me in place. "Concern?" I said slowly, trying to understand, trying to find a reason in his anger. "You're concerned about me?" He paused, and for a brief moment the rigid lines of his face softened just slightly, though his eyes still held that intensity. I can't stand seeing you glued to that screen while life is passing you by. You're spending so much time here, in front of a TV, and I'm worried you're forgetting what matters." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream that this was my time, my space, my way to unwind. Another part of me, a quieter, nagging part, felt a strange pang of guilt, an uneasy recognition that maybe he had a point. But why attack me this way? Why the anger, the sudden aggression? "I don't understand," I said softly, almost whispering now, as if saying it louder would make it more real. "Why attack something I love? Why not just talk to me?" He shifted, the stiffness in his posture flickering for a second, replaced by something harder to read, maybe frustration, maybe desperation. "Because I tried talking before, and it didn't work. You wouldn't listen. You'd laugh it off or shrug and keep watching. I can't just stand by anymore." The room felt smaller suddenly, as though the walls had pressed in, and I realized I could feel my own heart beating too loudly. The blanket on my lap was no longer comforting. It was a reminder of my inertia, my escape, my avoidance. I had always considered him strict, maybe a little overbearing, but never this urgent, this intense. The words he spoke were not just criticisms, they were warnings, though at the time, I didn't yet understand what he was warning me about. I sank back onto the armchair, my mind racing, trying to process the confrontation. I didn't know you felt that way. I thought we were fine. My voice was shaky, my hands fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. He didn't immediately respond, and the silence between us stretched. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a silence heavy with unspoken truths, with tension, with fear. Finally, he spoke, quieter this time, almost like he was confessing something he had buried for weeks. I'm worried. I see the little things you don't see. The fatigue, the breathlessness when you walk up the stairs, the way you sometimes forget appointments. And I can't ignore it. And when I see you lost in that show, I feel powerless. I feel like I'm watching you drift, and I can't reach you. His words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. The anger I had felt toward him began to melt into a knot of confusion, and then something else, something heavier, deeper, harder to describe, like a flicker of understanding mixed with guilt. It wasn't just a critique of my show or my habits. It was about me, about my life, about my well-being, and for the first time, I realized that his confrontation came from a place I had never considered before. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words, but they eluded me. I never realized. I thought you were just angry at me for wasting time. He shook his head slowly, his eyes softening but still carrying the weight of his concern. It's more than that. I can't explain it all in one go, but you mean a lot to me, and I can't watch you slowly let yourself fade into comfort and distraction. I had to make you notice. Somehow. I stared at him, my heart pounding, my mind struggling to reconcile the son-in-law I thought I knew with the man standing in front of me now. The confrontation that had initially felt like an attack now felt like a wake-up call, sharp and uncomfortable, but necessary. The tension in the room was still there, thick and almost painful, but it carried a strange new weight, a weight that hinted at care, concern, and love disguised as anger. I realized then that life had a way of catching you off guard. You think you understand the people around you. You think you know their motives, their hearts, and then, without warning, they confront you in a way that changes everything, that forces you to look at yourself differently, and forces you to feel emotions you weren't expecting. And as I sat there, staring at the man who had just turned off my TV and shattered my evening peace, I felt the first flicker of something new, an uneasy, trembling awareness that maybe he was right. Maybe he saw something I had been ignoring, and maybe, just maybe, this confrontation was the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. The morning light spilled through the kitchen window, casting a soft glow over the countertop where I sat, still wrapped in yesterday's thoughts, my hands curled around a warm cup of tea. I could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator, the faint chirp of birds outside, but inside, my mind was anything but quiet. Last night's confrontation with my son-in-law kept replaying in slow motion, each word etched deeper into my consciousness. I kept thinking about the anger in his voice, the suddenness of his action, the way he had shut off my TV as if he could snuff out my comfort and my world in one swift movement. But beneath that anger, I felt something else, something I couldn't quite name yet. I was lost in these thoughts when the sound of footsteps on the hardwood floor made me look up. He was there, standing in the doorway, holding a mug of coffee, eyes wary but firm, the kind of look that suggested he had been rehearsing what he needed to say for hours, or maybe days. "Morning," he said quietly, and I noticed the absence of any trace of the harshness from last night. He seemed different, calmer, but tense in a different way. "Morning," I replied, my voice uneven, unsure whether to keep the distance I felt building between us or to bridge it with conversation. He set the mug down gently on the table and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, gaze fixed on me with a strange mixture of resolve and hesitation. "Can we talk?" he asked, and I could hear the vulnerability in his voice, even though his posture tried to mask it. I nodded slowly, unsure what to expect. I had rehearsed so many reactions in my mind, from confrontation to cold silence, but none seemed appropriate now. "Sure," I said softly. He exhaled sharply, a long breath that seemed to carry all the tension he had been holding on to, and began speaking. "Yesterday, I know how it looked. I was harsh. I was abrupt. I didn't mean to hurt you, not really. But I had to make you notice, and I didn't know how else to do it." I frowned, leaning forward slightly. "Notice what?" His eyes dropped for a moment, scanning the counter as if gathering courage from the surface beneath him. Then he met my gaze again, steady and unwavering. "You're not taking care of yourself," he said. The words landed with a weight I hadn't expected. I blinked, unsure how to respond. I don't understand," I murmured. He moved a step closer, lowering his voice, making the conversation feel private, urgent. "I see the signs, the fatigue, the breathlessness when you walk up the stairs, the way you sometimes forget things you should remember. I've noticed your blood pressure readings, your lab results, the missed doctor's appointments, and it terrifies me." I swallowed hard, the first pang of guilt searing through me. I had been avoiding my health, ignoring the little warnings, convincing myself that a TV show, a routine, and small comforts were enough. And here he was, standing in front of me, seeing what I had been choosing not to see for myself. I thought you were angry about the show," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I thought it was just about wasting time." He shook his head slowly, and a soft sigh escaped him. "No, it was never the show. That was just the spark. I tried other ways to get your attention, gentle ways, small hints. You didn't notice. You didn't listen. And when I saw you last night, sitting there completely absorbed, I realized words wouldn't work, hints wouldn't work, subtle reminders wouldn't work. I had to do something drastic. I had to make you stop and actually see me, see yourself." The room felt heavy, filled with the tension of his concern and my dawning awareness. I could see the care etched into his every line, hear it in the tremor of his voice. This wasn't about control. This wasn't about judgment. This was worry. Pure, unfiltered worry. I took a shaky breath, trying to process what he was saying. You were worried about me? That's why you acted that way?" "Yes," he said simply, a note of relief passing through his voice, as if finally speaking the truth lifted a burden from his shoulders. "I was terrified. I can't pretend I wasn't. I've seen people I care about drift, get lost, and I couldn't just stand by and watch it happen to you. You mean too much to me to let it go unnoticed." His honesty hit me harder than I expected. Anger, irritation, and the sting of the previous night's confrontation began to dissolve into something I hadn't anticipated. Gratitude and an ache of recognition for someone who truly cared, even if his approach had been jarring. I had never seen him this way. I had always assumed he was strict, maybe controlling at times, focused on rules and order. But now I realized there was a depth there I had overlooked, a layer of care and commitment that went beyond appearances. I looked at him, studying the subtle signs of stress in his eyes, the way he had clenched his jaw before speaking, the careful way he chose his words. I never realized," I said, voice trembling. I thought you were just upset that I was wasting time. I didn't know you were worried about my health, about me." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, but it didn't erase the seriousness of his gaze. "I know it probably hurt you, and I regret the way I did it. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't just keep watching and hoping you'd notice for yourself. I had to act." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, an emotional cocktail of shame, relief, and understanding washing over me. The anger that had been so sharp the night before seemed trivial now, overshadowed by the weight of his concern, the raw honesty, and the courage it took to confront me the way he had. He had risked our relationship, risked my resentment, risked everything just to make sure I was seen, truly seen, and it struck me how rare that kind of care was. I took another slow breath, steadying myself, and realized that his actions, while abrupt, were an act of love. A bold, imperfect, human act of love. I could feel the tension between us easing, replaced by a quiet understanding, the kind that only comes after truth is spoken and hearts are laid bare. I didn't understand before, I said, voice breaking slightly. I see now. You were trying to protect me, to make me notice myself, notice my life. I can't believe I didn't see it sooner. He reached out, gently resting a hand on mine, a simple gesture of connection that grounded both of us. It's okay. You weren't supposed to see it immediately. You needed the jolt, the shock, to really pay attention. And I'll admit, I was scared it would backfire, that it would push you away. But I couldn't risk not trying. I squeezed his hand in return, the warmth of human connection washing over me, a quiet but profound acknowledgement that what we had just experienced was more than a confrontation. It was a bridge, built out of honesty and concern, fragile but real. For the first time in weeks, I felt clarity. The show, the hours, the distractions, they were not wrong on their own, but I had been using them to avoid the truths I didn't want to face. And now, thanks to him, I was being forced to confront those truths, to acknowledge my own vulnerability, and to recognize that someone I loved, someone I had underestimated, was willing to risk discomfort to make sure I didn't ignore what mattered most. The day stretched on quietly after that morning conversation, but the room felt different somehow, almost lighter, as if the air itself had shifted to accommodate the new understanding between us. I spent some time sitting in the living room, looking around at the familiar furniture, the soft rug under my feet, the little trinkets on the shelves, and yet nothing looked quite the same. Everything seemed sharper, more vivid, and I realized that my own perspective had changed. The TV sat off in the corner, dark and silent, no longer the centerpiece of my evening escape, and instead of feeling deprived or annoyed, I felt reflective. My son-in-law had gone back to his routine, but I could still feel his presence in the subtle changes that lingered in the room. The way he had spoken to me with honesty, the way he had risked my anger to make me see myself clearly. I thought about his words, his concerns, his gentle insistence that I pay attention to my health and my life. It was astonishing how one conversation could tilt the axis of your understanding, how seeing someone's genuine care could break down walls you didn't even know existed. Later that afternoon, I found myself moving around the kitchen, preparing a simple meal, and I realized that I was thinking of him in a new way. The sharpness of our confrontation had faded, replaced by a deep, almost reverent respect. I could feel gratitude and warmth rising in me, and I understood for the first time the courage it had taken for him to speak the truth so bluntly, the emotional risk he had carried on his shoulders just to ensure I was seen and noticed. When he returned home in the evening, I was sitting at the dining table, finishing the meal I had prepared, and he looked at me with that same steady gaze, wary but hopeful. "How are you feeling?" he asked. A simple question, but one that now carried layers of meaning. It was not just about physical health, not just about polite concern. It was about emotional well-being, about connection, about the unspoken acknowledgement that we were in this together. "I'm different," I admitted quietly, setting my fork down. "I've been thinking about what you said, about everything, and I realize I didn't just need to hear that harshness. I needed to see that you care, really care, and I didn't understand that before." He smiled faintly, a soft exhale escaping him, a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "I was worried you'd never see it," he said, his voice low and intimate, "that you'd take it the wrong way, or that you'd be angry with me forever. But I had to try." I stood and walked over to him, the warmth of the room and the calm of the evening giving me courage. "I was angry yesterday, I won't lie, but now I see it differently. I understand why you acted the way you did. I understand your fear, your concern, and I want you to know I appreciate it, even if it hurt at first." He reached for my hand, and we stood there for a long moment, Silent but connected. Two people bridged by honesty and care. I could feel the weight of yesterday's confrontation melting into something entirely new, something deeper. The tension, the anger, the confusion, it all shifted into clarity, understanding, and mutual respect. That evening, I didn't reach for the remote. I didn't turn on the TV. Instead, I sat quietly, reflecting on the hours I had spent lost in distraction, and realizing that my son-in-law's interruption was not an attack, but a wake-up call. I thought about all the ways I had been avoiding my own reality, clinging to comfort and routine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to change. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because someone had shown me the depth of their concern, and it made me realize the value of being seen, truly seen. As days passed, our interactions shifted subtly. He didn't lecture me or monitor me, but I noticed his quiet attention, his thoughtful questions, his presence that had become a gentle force guiding me without force. I found myself taking small steps, walking a little more, eating a little better, keeping track of my health, and even rediscovering simple joys outside of the screen that had dominated so much of my time. Each choice, each action felt richer because it was informed by awareness, by the understanding that someone cared deeply enough to confront me when it mattered. We also began to talk more openly, not just about health or habits, but about life, fears, regrets, and dreams. I learned about his childhood, his struggles, the reasons behind his protective instincts, and it made me realize that our connection had always been more than just familial. It was human, raw, and profoundly meaningful. He had shown me the power of honest confrontation, the bravery it takes to care for someone even when it's uncomfortable, and the depth of love that doesn't always look like affection at first glance, but sometimes looks like concern, frustration, or even anger. One evening, as we sat quietly on the porch, watching the sky fade into a wash of orange and purple, I spoke softly. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but thank you for yesterday, for caring enough to be honest, even when it was hard." He looked at me, a flicker of relief crossing his features, and replied, "You don't have to thank me. I would have done the same again if I had to. I just wanted you to notice yourself, to see your own worth, your own life, and not hide from it." I realized then that the moral of this experience wasn't just about him or me. It was about the courage it takes to care, and the humility it takes to accept care. Sometimes love doesn't arrive wrapped in comfort and sweetness. Sometimes it comes with abruptness, confrontation, and words that cut. But beneath it lies the intention to protect, to nurture, to awaken. Over the next few weeks, our relationship deepened. I felt a newfound closeness, a trust that hadn't existed before. I laughed more, not just at the shows on TV, but at stories we shared, moments in daily life, and even at myself for not seeing what had been in front of me all along. The anger I had felt initially seemed almost foolish now, a fleeting shadow compared to the clarity and connection we had forged. I also noticed subtle changes in myself, less reliance on distraction, more awareness of my health and my time, more appreciation for the people who were willing to confront me, even when it was uncomfortable. I had learned that confrontation, when rooted in love, is not something to fear, but a tool for growth. That day, that moment when he had turned off my TV and challenged me, became a turning point, a pivot from distraction to awareness, from apathy to engagement, from isolation to connection. I often think back to that instant, the flick of the remote, the words that cut through the quiet of my living room, and I understand now that life is full of those moments, moments that seem harsh or jarring at first, but in retrospect, are gifts. They force us to see ourselves, to reconsider our choices, and to recognize the people who truly care, even when it doesn't feel like it at the moment. I've learned to appreciate the layers of love and care that exist in the people around me, even when they don't look like the love I expected. I've realized that true connection requires honesty, vulnerability, and sometimes confrontation. And I've come to understand that the people willing to challenge us, to wake us from our comfortable routines, are often the ones who love us most deeply and unconditionally. Now, when I think of that evening, I don't think of anger or frustration. I think of courage, care, and awakening. I think of the lessons embedded in discomfort and the profound transformation that can happen when someone refuses to let us hide from ourselves. The TV may still sit in the corner, dark at times, but it no longer defines my evenings or my life. Instead, I focus on the moments, the people, and the choices that truly matter. Understanding that love sometimes comes with hard truths, but those truths are often the most precious gifts of all.